Welcome to the Rival Reds Pubcast. We're here in Leeds at the place and we're drinking a pint of Saltaire Blonde. Cheers, Mike.
Cheers, Rick. We're here today to talk about football. There is just under 3 weeks left in the transfer window. A hell of a lot of business has been done so far. So we're here just to have a quick rundown on who's done the best of the business so far. We're here to review our top 5 transfers of the summer so far. Why don't you start, Rick? What's your number 5?
Well, we're going to follow the standard ABAB penalty format. So
yeah, my favourite Swedish band.
No, that's ABBA.
And list
the
format
opposite.
as well. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, so my number 5, perhaps a bit left field, I don't know, but I'm going for Delafeu.
Okay.
I've loved him every time he's been in the Premiership. I think he's a really, really good player. I thought he was underrated when he was playing for Everton, and I thought he did a really good job when he came in last season on loan for Watford. And they've got him at only 11.5 million. Only. But in today's pricing,
yeah.
I think that is an absolute steal for for a player who I think is such high quality.
Yeah, I think the thing with Delafeu has always been the quality is always there ever since. I think he started at Barcelona, didn't he?
Yeah.
When he made the move away from Barca, in certain games he would look like an absolute world beater. Whereas the consistency at his previous clubs, he's never really been able to find. Did you see him finding that level of consistency this season, or do you think it'll be more of the same?
I think it'll be. I think it's really difficult to be incredibly consistent at a club that isn't themselves consistent. So the further down the league you go, I think the more difficult it is to be consistent because you're not necessarily seeing the ball as much as you would at a better team. But I think one game in particular sticks in my mind from his Everton days, and he absolutely ran the show. Every time he got the ball, he looked like he was going to set up a goal or score himself. And he didn't actually score that day, but he set up 3 goals, and he was the maestro of everything that went on that day. Obviously, Garth Brooks didn't put him in his team of the week.
He's got high standards. You've got to really impress Garth to
but
make
the
that
3
team.
Players that scored somehow made their way into the team.
Well, that's what football's about at the end of the day, mate. It's scoring goals, isn't it? Just matter if you set them up. Still be 0-0 if the striker wasn't there to put them in.
I've got a lot of time for him, and I think he's a really good player. So he makes it in at number 5 for me.
I can certainly agree with that. I think even though he's got questions about his consistency, at 11 million, sounds daft to say, but you can afford to take that sort of a gamble where they haven't spunked their whole budget on one player, and it's a useful option to have a player of that talent moving for that amount of money. So I can certainly see why you're putting that. Moving on to my number 5, I've gone with Fred, or Fredge, as he's known in his native Brazil. He's been signed by Manchester United this summer, obviously, which came a little bit out of by surprise. We've been in the market for a midfielder, but I think getting Fred was not on many people's the top of many people's list at the start of the season. The reason I've included him is because I think, as we saw in the World Cup to some extent, a hell of a lot is still to come from Paul Pogba, and this signing could, you would hope, be the catalyst to our midfield, showing the actual quality it has the potential to do. I think he'll fit in beside Matic and allow Pogba with a bit of that freedom to be the box-to-box player that he's always sort of had the potential to become. I think Pogba will still have to be disciplined, but he showed for France that he can do that. And I think with someone like Fred behind him, picking passes and being able to play the sort of role that Michael Carrick did before he had to retire and went out of his prime, I think we can see the best of Pogba in the next up-and-coming season.
Do you think he'll help Pogba to become consistent? Because Pogba, it's a similar thing with Delafeu. It can be incredibly inconsistent. So do you think that's something that Fred will be able to help with?
I do. I think too much is made of Pogba's not just his inconsistency, but the standards that he's held to. I think at the start of the season he was absolutely on fire, and really up until his injury, he was one of the best players in the league. But then once he came back, he was still performing at a decent level. It's just if Pogba isn't skinning someone and slotting it in from 30 yards, people tend to say, oh, he's had a quiet game or he's not really delivered. Whereas for a centre midfielder, as we saw for France, playing that disciplined role and using his abundance of talent to perform a job for the team is what Mourinho is clearly going to continue to ask him to do. And I think that having Fred alongside him will prevent that issues last season where we saw Matic being overrun and Pogba basically being asked to be the legs for Matic, whereas now Pogba has another player to be his legs and to do some of the running for him. However, I would have to say it all sounds pretty familiar to the noises that a lot of United fans were making when we signed Matic, in that Matic was supposed to be the player to free up Pogba. I think it didn't end up like that because Matic he's a fantastic player, but he's not a physical presence and he can't do a lot of the running. And I think having someone a similar role to what Kante played in the France team, to just take some of the running away from Pogba and allow him to not be as overrun in the middle of the park will do wonders.
I think that's an odd thing to say about Matic, though, given that that's exactly what he did for Chelsea. Mm-hmm. You know, he was able to break up the play and he was certainly a runner in that team. So what is it about Mourinho that has meant that hasn't carried over to the...
I don't think it's anything about Mourinho. I think it's just age. I think Matic is an older player now. And, I mean, if you look at his career once Kante signed for Chelsea, that midfield duo worked as Kante on either side of Matic. And Matic was picking the ball up, using his intelligence to sniff out danger, but really wasn't the player who would be the all-energy, combative centre midfielder. And clearly, that's what we need. It was evident last season at so many times where once Matic is overrun, when he has two players run at him, he looks like a deer in the headlights. And that composed, calculated, intelligent defender completely vanished. So getting just some legs in there, I think, will be the difference.
So, when you look at the United team, do you think that Fred is filling a big gap that you've had in the team?
Yeah, I think any team has to set out to get the best out of their best players, and I think Pogba is unquestionably the most talented player for Manchester United, arguably one of the most talented players in the world. So if we can get the best out of them, I think that alone will see the performance of the team go up massively. And this is a signing that I would hope would do just that.
It's really, you kind of see it as an ancillary signing, don't you? Yeah, it's in order to get the best out of Pogba.
That's it. He's not a world-class player who's coming into the team, but we've had far too many of those. And if the system behind them is broken, then they're just another expensive round peg in a square hole. And Fred is not the most glamorous of signings, or the most glamorous signing, but I think he can definitely add legs to the midfield, which will allow Pogba to show more of the player that he can become.
Does he play whether Pogba plays or not, do you think?
I think so. I think we'll see him potentially partnering Pogba with a more attacking player played in the number 10 role ahead of him against teams that we are expected to beat, and certainly when Matic is rotating. And then in the tighter games, I think it will be a midfield three of him, Pogba, and Matic. And I think that'll allow us to have the energy and the legs to play that sort of conservative pressing style. And then Pogba will be looked at in that formation to be the difference maker in the final third.
Okay, cool. Right, so on to my number 4. I have James Maddison going to Leicester. The reason I've stuck James Maddison in there, I took a look at him when he was linked to Liverpool earlier in the summer, and everything about him, I think he's a bit of a class act, and I think he's actually playing. I think last season, while he was at Norwich, I think he was playing at a level below him. I think he's capable of a lot more, and I think we'll see that at Leicester this season. I think Leicester will give him the time he needs to settle into the squad. I think they'll bring him through, and I actually think he'll be a key player for them next season.
Wow, as early as that?
I really do.
Straight in.
Yeah, I think he'll come straight in, and I think I think everyone's going to be asking the question, who's James Maddison?
Well, I certainly was earlier today. It's not the Maddison that I'm most familiar with, but enough said about my internet dalliance as the bear. What sort of a player are Leicester buying then? For those of us who haven't seen him in the Championship, what does he bring to the team? What sort of player is he?
So he's a classy midfielder. He's cool under pressure, distributes the ball really, really well. He's got a great eye for a pass. He's basically going to be. He's clearly, obviously, not a replacement for Mahrez. But he is going to fill that creative. I think he's going to fill the creative gap that's going to be lost with Mahrez going in a different manner. Because I don't think Leicester have anyone like that in their current midfield.
Yeah, agreed. And a team like Leicester can't go out and just find another Mahrez. And it's interesting with what you're saying, because I think the first thing that comes to my mind when you think of what Leicester need, having lost a player like that, is just someone to provide that creative spark. I mean, Vardy isn't the sort of player who's going to create his own chances, and I agree that they need to find some way to replace that sort of creativity. It'll be interesting to see whether he can find that sort of almost telepathic link with Vardy, because at some points Mahrez and Vardy just seem to be so in tune and on the same wavelength that it was almost a two-man show, and they could score at will between them. So yeah, is it a bit of he's a young lad, is that correct?
Yeah. Well, he's probably 23, 24 now, I think.
Okay, so he's not. I'm wondering whether it's a bit too much pressure to put on his shoulders with not a like-for-like replacement, but asking him to be the creative difference for probably one of the best players in Leicester's history.
But they're brilliantly organised, Leicester. They've got such good organisation, so it's not like he has to worry about coming in and doing an overly defensive job. You know, he's not going to be tied down to. I mean, that's slightly silly to say, given that everyone from Vardy all the way back worked defensively for the team. But I mean, that's not going to be. He's not going to be brought in for that role. He's going to be there to go out and be the creative force that they need in the team.
Yeah, and I suppose with Leicester at the moment, they're not a team who are looking for a title challenge, European placement. So there is a bit less.
They probably weren't 3 years ago either.
No, exactly, and I guess that speaks to the larger point of it's a nice environment to develop as a player, because you're not under pressure to win every single game and to get a certain league position. If Leicester finish the season in mid-table or 7th or 8th outside European shot, but he has a very good season, then I think that'll be looked at as a success, and it won't become under instant criticism the first time they lose a game. It's an interesting one, and not someone that I considered. For my number 4, on a similar club, I've gone for Johnny Evans signing for Leicester. I think it's certainly not the most glamorous transfer, but I think what he brings in terms of the stability and just an absolute calm head at the back will be vital for them. He was signed for £3.5 million, which is absolute peanuts in today's day and age.
Well, particularly when you consider that Arsenal and City were looking at him for 20 million in January.
Exactly, a few months ago, and I think obviously January gets a bit silly when a team has a particular weakness, but I do think that speaks to the level of player he was. I think you could make an argument for him being a squad player, and maybe a squad player for Man City and a starter for Arsenal with the level of talent he's got. Arguably a starter for City, depending on how highly you rate Otamendi. He's the finished article. He will not really let you down very often. He's had his learning curve in one of the best teams of the Premier League era with some of the best players at Man United. And
sorry, I thought you meant West Brom.
Well, and this is the other side of it. I mean, I wouldn't have him order a taxi for anyone, but I think that sort of faux pas aside, he's a model pro. He is a reliable figure, and on and off the field, I think that he can have a good influence for Leicester. I think he shores up any defence he comes into, and I think that he's. I think there's a hell of a lot of teams in the league who could do with a player like Johnny Evans, and I think for Leicester to get him for so cheap, is a coup for them.
And I have to admit, I seriously considered him mainly because of the price, and that's a steal, really.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so for my number 3, I've gone for. I have to admit, slight bias in here. I've gone for Shaqiri. The main reasons, we've got him at probably no more than 13 million. I don't know what there's a plethora of actual final prices that were paid for him out there. But, so let's say 13 million. I think that's the highest we possibly paid. But for 13 million, we've basically got a bit of cover for either of our wide positions, or in a pinch, our number 10. And I think at that price, when you look at what he did in the World Cup, I thought he was great for Switzerland, and I think that is it's a great price to get somebody who's going to be backup cover for our front 3, really.
Yeah, I think all that's fair. The big reservation I would have about this one is that whilst I agree he was good in the World Cup for Switzerland, he was the main man in that side and the main creative influence and the first name on the team sheet. Similarly for Stoke, he was always the first one selected and the one that they looked at to be the inspiration. Given that, and also a bit of his temperament, and maybe temperament's the wrong word, but some of the comments, some of what you read about off the field, and him obviously angling for a big money move for the last year or two. Can he really be that he sort of sit there nice and quietly on the bench and just wait for his opportunity?
I mean, I can't believe that he's had a conversation with Klopp that went any other way other than Klopp saying, I want you to be back up to my first 3.
Yeah, he's gone into it with eyes wide open on what he'll be expected to do in the team. That's true.
And given that, he's not going to have been lied to, and so it's very difficult then to be dissatisfied with your lot if you know what you're walking into.
Yeah. And then on the separate point, okay, maybe he'll be happy with that, with playing a more reserved role and being asked to come on as the difference maker. Do you think he'll flourish in a system where he is that, rather than a team not necessarily being built around him, but being front and centre? It's easy to look good on YouTube compilations when you played 90 minutes every week and you've had 2 moments of brilliance in an otherwise anonymous game where you've just you've been quietly consistent. It's another to come on and suddenly turn that switch on. Do you think he's got that in his locker to be a good
I mean, Charlie Adam doesn't have much good to say about him, but I think he probably doesn't have much good to say about anyone, to be fair.
Yes, he's a dour individual.
Has he got that in his locker? Well, I guess time will tell. He played that role at Bayern Munich.
True.
And I have to admit, I don't know how successful he was in doing that. But he went there thinking that he was going to be challenging for a first team role, and unfortunately, his counterparts were Robben and Ribéry, who were just never injured.
Yeah, true.
So I don't really know how much of a chance he got there, and also how important it was. But if either Mane or Salah get injured, he's going to be one of the first names on the team sheet.
Yeah, certainly. And I mean, it really summed up the need for him in the Champions League final, which I know we touched on last time we had that conversation of looking to the bench and seeing Shaqiri and bringing him on as a difference maker is a hell of a lot better than looking to the bench to look at an out of form Lallana or somebody else. There's an extra difference to when you haven't been able to break down a stubborn defence. It can only really be a good thing.
Well, I think he's probably a similar standard to Lallana, actually, and will also be back up to the first team as Lallana probably will as well. And I think he can do a job for us. I think it's a good signing, and particularly with this one, I'm paying attention to the price.
Yeah, it's a good deal, and I think it shows that if nothing else, there's a lot of players who want to be, a part of the project that's going on there. The ability to attract that without offering first team football to them, as you say, it does bode pretty well. It's a higher quality of backup that you've had so far, I think.
And it's nice to be in a position where we're buying Premiership players as backup to the first team, rather than lesser quality going into the first team.
Yeah,
it shows how far we've come.
No, exactly. Yeah, there's smaller holes to fill. Okay, no, I agree with that one. I think I don't think he'll have a huge influence next season, but I guess if you look back and he's made the difference in a couple of games and he's allowed like Salah or Mane to be rested a bit, then he's done his job really. Yeah.
Okay, so who you got at 3, pal?
So my number 3 is Jorginho, who signed for Chelsea in the end, to much to a lot of people's surprise. It looked on at one point, well, for most of last season, that he was nailed on to go to City.
I think all of the top 6 were linked with Jorginho at some point, weren't they?
Yeah, definitely. He's a name that's been touted well ever since he broke through at Napoli, really. And it was City thought it was a done deal, and certainly a lot of the noises that are coming out from Pep himself and the club seems to be pretty outraged that anyone would want to choose a team other than City, and that was always fun. So he would almost make my list just for that alone. But I do think that Chelsea are getting a hell of a player. Do you think this is a signing that United missed out on as well? And this was their first choice to Fred. It was certainly Jorginho and Fabinho who were the 2 names that were linked a hell of a lot earlier than Fred was. And I think it's the trend that we're seeing in the league now, where a lot of teams are looking for that similar player. And I mean, you think of Jorginho, Fred, Fabinho.
Off the back of Kante doing what he's done at Chelsea.
It's partially that, and it's, I guess, partially because of the, for Chelsea, Fabregas is getting a hell of a lot older and isn't able to influence the game. For us, Michael Carrick dropped out of the team, and Liverpool have to play Jordan Henderson week in, week out. Right. So it's always a position that you need to strengthen, and if you look to enforce your will on other teams, you're always looking at the centre of the park to do that. And all 3 of these players, although they're different in how they actually execute the task, they can control the game, they're good on the ball, and they can pick passes and be at the heart of an engine room. Jorginho, when comparing him to Fred, I think they are more similar, especially when compared to Fabinho, who's more of a defensive player. But with Jorginho, you're getting a very, very creative player, one who can pass incredibly well and also has a lot of energy. And with Fabregas fading into, I don't want to say he'll not play a part next year, but he's coming off the back of a pretty poor season, and he is a year older. And I think to see Jorginho alongside Kante, I think Chelsea fans can be rightfully pretty excited about what their centre midfield looks like next season.
I think going into the start of last season, Chelsea had one of the best first 11s, and it just never really happened for them. And everyone has aged. With Costa gone, I think they really need to fill that gap up top.
Yeah.
And that's a key area, because I don't think Morata or Giroud, I don't think either of them are as good as Costa. And particularly for the way that they were set up. I think they almost need somebody who's a bit nasty like Costa.
Agreed. Yeah. And he does not necessarily bring the nastiness, but he does bring a physicality, and he does bring a presence in midfield. And I think that fixes their engine room, although it's not, as you say, all that they need. But yes, he will be number 3 on my list, just because I think managing to pip him from one of your rivals is always good. You stop your rival from strengthening and also get stronger yourself. And I think they're signing a hell of a player.
What do you think of the price, by the way? 50 million.
50 million is, I think, probably the going rate for a player like that who's been
standard.
Very good, but not world class centre midfield. He was one of the standout players in that Napoli team. But yeah, certainly is not a ready-made world-class player. But I don't think Chelsea can have too many grumbles, and I think their fans will certainly be pretty pleased to see them spending that level of cash again, because it's a move away from austerity Abramovich that we've seen recently.
Well, I mean, Morata was a really big signing. 70 odd million.
I don't think he was. He might have been around that region, but certainly, I mean, given the free spending in the early days, I think,
it's not quite been the same, has it?
No, it's definitely been a tighter budget.
I mean, if they were spending as they were in the early days, we'd probably be seeing £100 million signings, wouldn't we?
Yeah, exactly. And he clearly had the model of wanting Chelsea to be self-sufficient, and I think in the last few seasons, been somewhere approaching that, and it's been to a lot of managers huge discontent, the lack of investment in the transfer budget. Obviously, that was the reason. One of the key reasons that Conte went in the end was just because he didn't feel that after winning the title he was adequately backed.
Crazy not to get that business done earlier in the summer.
What, the Morata deal?
No, Conte leaving.
Oh yeah, that's a strange one that dragged on.
4 days into pre-season, bizarre.
Yeah. It's a strange one, and I think that's the way Chelsea operate, though. You know, they've always got a very separate transfer
childish
policy and childish, but it's worked for them. You know, they'll have the manager is interchangeable. They'll just have we're waiting for the coach to arrive, and he'll rock up, and I think business will continue there as normal. And at this time in the cycle, they'll probably win the league in the next couple of years with whoever they choose to do it, and then sack him a year later. I don't know anything will change.
I think Watford are very much in that mould.
Yeah, certainly so.
So my number 2 is Naby Keita.
Okay.
Now,
no bias there at all as well, obviously.
2
Liverpool players so far. I'm keeping count, man. Just want to keep you honest.
So we've bought him for 52.75 million.
Yeah.
And
about 7 years ago at this point as well.
I think the clever thing about this is we bought him in a year ago and set the price at that stage. I think had we bought him this summer or tried to set the price this summer, I think we would have been looking at 80-90 million to get a player of Keita's quality. Even getting Keita, I think he is would have cost us that much. So I think we've saved ourselves 30 million by getting the business done a year in advance.
What makes you say that? Because of the season he's had, or because of just the way
because of the inflation of prices? I still think he's the same player, but I think the inflation of prices, we would have been paying a lot more for this player. And having seen him now in 3 pre-season games, I think he is going to be unstoppable next season. I think he's absolutely brilliant. We just played Blackburn and in pre-season, and you can say, all right, it's just
Mighty
Blackburn. Yeah, whatever.
And it's just pre-season. You've got to get both of those in
there. He is breaking lines. He's tackling people high up the pitch. He's so good. He does what Kante does, but 30 yards further up the pitch. So as soon as he's got the ball, he's then slotting the most precise through balls through that you've ever seen in your life. And he's been so incisive. He was electric against Blackburn. And again, let's use let's just highlight that it's only Blackburn, but I think this guy is going to be doing it against Man City. He's going to be doing it against United. He's going to be doing it against everybody in the league. I think he's absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, he certainly comes with a lot of promise. Does his disciplinary record worry you at all? I think he got sent off about 5 or 6 times last year.
His disciplinary record was horrendous last season. There's 2 points to this, though. First of all, I think the fact that he already had his foot out the door.
Yeah, true.
Probably didn't help matters. But also, I've read an article from the coaches at his last club, and they were saying that it was kind of a bias thing. Like he got a bit of a reputation for being a dirty player, and ended up all those 50-50 challenges where you may or may not get a yellow card. He's getting a yellow card on all of those. And then every challenge, which is a 50-50 between a yellow and a red, he just gets a straight red. So
now, Scousers will fucking love him. You've got conspiracy theories about him already before he's kicked the ball for you, mate. The first booking he gets, it will be,
they're against him.
Knives are out. Fair enough. And to be honest, I didn't see much of last season, but from what I understand, I didn't see much of him last season, I should say. From what I understand, it was over eagerness on a lot of the tackles. It was 2 bookings from just being a little bit late and being too eager to get the ball, rather than it being, a 2-footed lunges.
Yeah, he's not a dirty player.
Yeah, exactly. So no, he comes with a high billing, and I think hope he doesn't have the impact that he has the potential to next season. But it'll be interesting to see how he slots in.
Okay, so who you got as your number 2?
My number 2 is another Liverpool player. It's washed my mouth out after this, but it's Alisson. Just solely for the reason of how shit Karius was in whenever it mattered for you last season. I know you're going to give me all this. For the second half of the season, he wasn't that bad, but you'd be the first to admit that you were desperate for a good quality goalkeeper who wouldn't let you down when it mattered. Alisson looks to be that based on last season. So I have as my number 2.
Yeah, put in any goalkeepers that we have aside, I think he's an absolutely brilliant signing for us, and I have him as my number 1 for that reason.
Yeah, understandable.
Despite the price tag, I think his importance to Liverpool and moving us forward and making a step change for the club cannot be understated. If you look at what Ederson did for Man City, and Ederson plays second fiddle to Alisson in the Brazil national team for a reason. And if you look at the impact that Ederson had at Man City, I think Alisson's impact for Liverpool could be potentially even greater than that.
I suppose by that definition of him being the first choice Brazil, I could see that. Obviously, one of Ederson's biggest influences was his distribution. Do you think Alisson has that same quality in terms of his distribution? It's important with the way Liverpool play, I guess, to continually be on the front foot.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's the main reason that we are happy to pay so much for him, because if you have a look at distribution stats, he's right up there with... it's not just his distribution stats. In every metric that you can look at, he's right up there as one of the top 5 keepers in the world. But as you rightly point out, distribution is so key from our keeper to get the ball moving and get the team moving quickly. And whenever Mignolet was in goal for us, it was very, very dithering. He could never spot a pass. It's almost like he lacked the confidence either in his ability to make the pass or in his ability to judge whether it was the right pass. He was just never quite there. And Karius was much, 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 much better at the distribution side.
Yeah, I think that's why he stayed in the team for longer. Why Klopp maybe had a bit more patience with him, wasn't it? Because he could play with that level of distribution to do what he needed. He just lacked it in key moments.
But ultimately, he hasn't been quite as good on the goalkeeping side.
Which is another important part of being a goalkeeper. At least half and half.
But Alisson seems to have both sides of that lockdown. And I just think if he can be that top 5 goalkeeper in the world for us, then I think it will help our whole team to flourish. Just having the confidence that you've got somebody behind you that's not going to drop the ball in the back of the net, that's that's going to be able to spot your run and pick you out from 50, 60 yards, just gives you the confidence to make the run in the first place.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and I think my only reservation is, and I want to preface this by saying that first of all, a lot's been made about his price, the fact that he's the most expensive goalkeeper in the world, and is that too much to spend on a goalkeeper, blah blah blah. I think that's nonsense. I think goalkeeper is one of the most important positions, if not the most important position on the field, and I think that you spend whatever it takes to get a world-class goalkeeper or as good a quality goalkeeper as you can. Also, he was excellent last season, but My reservation is that before last season, it didn't really feature very much, and there is, I think, still a question mark over the fact whether he had a very good season and what his consistent level is. So just to give a sort of statistical comparison, obviously it's not fair to compare every goalkeeper in the world to David De Gea, but David De Gea is about a year and a half older than Alisson. David De Gea has just made his 300th career appearance for Man United. Alisson, despite playing since I think 2012, making his debut, he's only made 80 club appearances, and that's in 6 years since. He wasn't a first choice at his Brazilian club until I think it was Dida who was at that club moved on, and so he was back up there. He was back up for a long time at what's the club he signed from?
Where we signed from, Roma.
At Roma, sorry. He was back up for Szczesny at Roma.
Yeah, he was only Roma bought him 2 years ago, and he played second fiddle to Szczesny while they bought him, and they only bought him for about 7 million, I think.
Yeah.
And so, rightly or wrongly, he played second fiddle to Szczesny, but even before he took over from Szczesny, the coaches have come out since. I know it's still like hindsight and made it all make themselves look clever.
Yeah.
But they've said, he was always going to be our number one.
Okay.
It was never a case that he wasn't going to be. And even while he wasn't the Roma number one, he was still Brazil's number one.
Yes, true. Yeah, and I know national teams can sometimes be a bit funny on who they select and whatever the manager's personal favourites are. But yeah, he's clearly got he's clearly got a pedigree, and he's come from being a season where he's been up there with the very best in the world. My worry would be, well, not a worry, my hope would be that that's not his natural level, and that it was a very good season, and he returns back to being another one of your decently talented but error-prone keepers.
I mean, if you look at his strengths are everything that you want in a goalkeeper. So I don't really think there's a case of seeing a drop off in those levels. If you're a good passer of the ball, you're a good passer of the ball. It's not like you become a bad passer of the ball overnight.
But Bravo was a good passer of the ball. He's still
but not much of a keeper.
No, exactly. And this question mark's still
there.
It's
similar. Bravo was a similar player to Karius, and this is why I say I'm really hoping that we see a similar response from Liverpool with Alisson coming in that we've seen with Ederson that we saw last season with Ederson going to City.
Yeah. And I think we could. I just think Liverpool do have a habit, especially recently, of making promising or good keepers look shit whenever they play for you guys. I mean, Mignolet was a well thought of keeper when you signed him. And I don't know if the problem runs deeper than just unless you can sign David De Gea or Oblak. I don't know if I still think that there's still a chance that you could be having another run.
I think Alisson is the next person in that list. So I think, and the list would be the other way around, by the way.
Maybe. Risk us.
But I think this is the right signing. I think it's the right time. I think it's going to make a massive difference to the team.
Clearly, it's a position you've been absolutely crying out for, and if you can make a difference, and we're looking back in a year's time saying what season he's just had, then it'll be one of the most important, possibly the most important piece in the Klopp jigsaw. But
well, as much as you're trying to poo-poo it, you've got him as your number two.
No, exactly, and that's for that reason. It's because if he is as good as last season represents, he will be the most important piece in Klopp's jigsaw. You can't rely on Salah to have the season he did last year every year. You can't rely on another player to have that sort of season, but you can rely on a consistent goalkeeper making your defence look better and knitting the whole thing together. And if he can stop the sort of dropped points that we saw last season in big games, then it'll make the world of difference.
It's one of the most difficult. I think it's the most difficult position to coach as well. I think we have struggled to improve our keepers, and I do think Karius definitely improved for us, and we saw an improvement in his play. But if somebody's prone to mistakes, they're prone to mistakes.
Yeah, true.
And I don't think you can coach it out of somebody.
I agree. I agree to an extent, but I think I can't talk about goalkeeper coaching without bringing up Tony Cope. And he's the Manchester United goalkeeper coach, and he used to be Manchester United keeper, but injury forced him to retire. So he joined the backroom staff and is our goalkeeping coach. And he was the one who's credited with getting De Gea through his really dodgy spell at the start and going from a keeper who would, look like flapping at crosses and really unconfident to the world beater World Cup side that we see today. So I think there's definitely a role of getting that balance right, and coaching can be important. But I do know what you're saying. It's only as good as the ingredients you're given. And if Liverpool's excuse or reason for not having a reliable keeper is because the ones they've tried haven't been good enough, then yeah, there's not much you can do with that other than sign a better keeper.
From what I've seen and read, Alisson brings the kind of calm and confidence that Van Dijk has brought to our defence. And yeah, if you've got two players in your back five that are doing that, I think then you can just pretty much slot in any others alongside them, and as long as they're competent, then you'll be okay.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I mean, it's certainly two players in your back four who are the most expensive in the world for that position, or back five rather, who are the most expensive in the world. Most expensive defender in the world, most expensive goalkeeper. It's pretty rich for a manager who said he didn't want, even if he had the sort of money, didn't want to make those sort of signings, and would have passed over signing Pogba.
Yeah, he's clearly got over that bit. So who's your number one?
So yes, my number one, Alisson missed out for those reasons, even though I think he could be brilliant. But my number one is a bit more left field, is Jean-Michel Seri, who signed for Fulham. I am amazed that he's signed for Fulham and not somebody else. He made his name at Nice, and he's been there for I think the last 3 or 4 years. He was highly tipped to go to Barcelona, and it even got as advanced as Xavi when they played each other. Gave interviews saying that this guy is my replacement, this is my heir at Barcelona, and the footballing world thought that the deal was essentially done. For whatever reason, he had to stay at Monaco and at Nice, and the deal fell through. He finished the season really, really well, and has went on to be, again, a very, very highly touted young midfielder who, again, pretty much all of the top clubs in the world were after at some point or another. So for him to go to Fulham, similar to what we were talking about with Maddison, an environment where he's not expected to be a world-class player straight away. He's my number one for the reason of I would be very surprised if we weren't here in a year or 2 years talking about his 50 million plus move to a top European side. I think this is the perfect. I think he'll give Fulham a year or 2 years of absolute brilliance, similar to what Berbatov did there before we signed.
How much did he go for?
I'm not sure. I know it was
undisclosed.
It was undisclosed. I think it was less than 15 million. I think it's been touted as about 11 or 12 million, although I could be wrong about that. It is undisclosed. But for that sort of fee, and to go to a team like Fulham, who play a similar way, it's not like he's going to Cardiff, and yeah, there's not that much pressure, but his primary role was watching the ball fly over his head as it's lumped from the goalkeeper to the centre forward. Bit harsh on Cardiff, but Fulham play the style of football that's pretty perfect for him. And I think I can really see him learning his trade at that level, playing against the best players. And yeah, it's a stepping stone, clearly, but I think Fulham will get 1 or 2 seasons out of one of the most talented young players in the world.
I'm excited to watch Fulham next season.
Yeah,
I think they've got an exciting young team and a great manager by all accounts.
Yeah.
What he's come in and done, second half of the season, they were on fire, weren't they? So if he continues that into this season, which is obviously going to be immeasurably difficult to do, but if he can, I think the manager will be snapped up by somebody.
Yeah, agreed. I think that's the risk for them. I think is that that project being derailed by the manager going or key personnel going. But I think he's done it on a pretty small budget, and he's done it playing the right way, the sort of football that's fantastic to watch. Really looking forward to seeing them next season. I'm really looking forward to going as well, because Craven Cottage, maybe my favourite away day, I think. Sitting on the banks of the Thames, supping a pint. Yeah, might have to do a live show from there, mate.
on that note, mate, how was your Saltaire Blonde?
Fantastic. Second time we've had it here, and it was probably better kept than the first. Went down a treat, and Saltaire Brewery, very local and excellent local brewery. Yeah,
great pint. If you haven't had a chance to try anything from Saltaire Brewery, have a look out, keep an eye out for it, and give it a try. It's lovely.
Here. So just quickly, finally, to review our top 5. I had Fred as my number 5. At 4 was Johnny Evans. At 3 was Jorginho. 2, Allison. And at number 1 was Seri. What were yours?
Mine were Delafeu, Maddison, Shaqiri, Keita, and Allison.
Well, we'll see who's proven right in the coming season.
The number 1 of number 1s.
Possibly. But you can all watch with us and see how they all get on in this season. And join us next time for another episode.
Thanks for tuning in, guys.
Cheers, guys.